hard to follow that. It really is, but it was inspiring. So let's hope that we can anchor that in some practicalities. So, Rachel, absolutely delighted that you're here with me today and that we can share some transition planning experiences from the ground. It's great to have you here. Should we just introduce ourselves first? Because probably most people here won't know either of us. So you have a go.
Thanks very much, Julie, and it's very nice to be here today. Thank you very much for having me. My name's Rachel McEwen, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of electric utility company SSE. So we're headquartered in Scotland, and we're involved in every part of the generation, distribution and transmission of electricity, mainly in the UK and Ireland, although we've got some ambitions to generate renewable energy elsewhere too. But I sometimes describe the company as a perfect example of a company in transition. We used to generate electricity from coal and from gas and from renewables. 3 years ago, we closed our last coal plant, and now we just generate electricity from gas and renewables. And of course, we have every intention of making every kilowatt hour of electricity to come from low carbon sources. So I think you could probably describe us as enthusiasts of the transition plan process, and as a team, we've thrown ourselves into the work of the TPT behind the scenes, and now we've just joined the delivery group.
And we're delighted to have you on it. Thank you. So I'm Julie Baddeley. I'm on a number of real economy boards, but I think I'm here today primarily because I chair something called Chapter Zero, which is the UK network for non-execs and chairs on climate. We've got 2,500 members in the UK, and we're part of a global set of chapters which now span 55 countries. So one of the things that's come through already this evening is this is a global issue. We've all got to be in this together, and one of the things we're trying to do is to build that knowledge in the boardroom to give people the courage to do some of the things that Sarah was talking about earlier, because I think courage is an important word in some of this. I also co-chair part of the TPT work streams. So what we thought we'd do is share some experiences. Rachel's going to start by telling us about the SSE journey. We've talked about this before, and I know that your emissions reduction so far is pretty impressive. You know, you've done a huge amount, but why did you decide to prepare a full transition plan in 2021, and what kicked that work off?
So it is true that we've been on a decarbonisation journey for well over a decade, but to be perfectly frank, so too should other power sector companies. This is the sector of the economy that needs to be first up. Now, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't need to be precise in our planning for the next stage of the journey. And it's also fair to say that we have really highly engaged investors, shareholders and stakeholders. And 2/3 of our top 30 shareholders are signatories to something called Climate Action 100+, which is a sort of investor group that really focuses on some of the world's largest emitters. So they had encouraged us, as other companies like Unilever, to have a say on climate vote, which we had at our annual general meeting in 2021. And there was 99.96% vote in favour, which was quite remarkable. But what shareholders agreed to was that was to a framework that we would go back to shareholders on an annual basis for them to receive a net zero transition report. So that was what was agreed. So then we're thinking, well, to prepare a net zero transition report, it would be excellent if we had absolute clarity on our net zero transition plan. So we did that. We created it last March. We've actually iterated it already in October, because there was things that we needed to adapt to because of some strategic changes in the company. So basically what we did was this plan that had 3 themes: targets, then actions, because targets without actions are just wishful thinking. And then we had this 3rd theme that we called integrity, but actually in the TPT framework is effectively the accountability section. We could talk a little bit about that as well. But I suppose what we did was we already had some science-based targets, so we had gone through that process before, but what we needed to do was really spell out the actions. Now those actions, we were quite methodical about it, scopes 1, scopes 2, scope 3, short, medium and long term, just thinking through actually what we needed to do in order to achieve those science-based targets. Now, because each of those actions were quite important to each of the business units in the company, there was obviously quite a lot of checks and balances with executives and toing and froing that went back and forth. And then we had a special meeting of our board to consider the plan in full, and they approved it before publication last March. Now, that's right, thank you. My prompt. But the truth is that while it is completely true that the power sector needs to be first up, and we are talking, our sector is talking about how you get rid of the last kilogram of emissions in the 2030s. But it also gives you an indication how important it is to everybody else. And if electricity is completely decarbonised, then it deals with everybody else's scope 2 emissions. But I can only imagine that net zero transition plans in other sectors are really tough, and that they're tough to establish. So I suppose my question is, because I only know my own sector, is from your perspective, what are the challenges in establishing credible targets and plans in the other sectors of the economy?
I mean, it is interesting. The theme of the panel that we've just had was very much about get started, you know, really roll your sleeves up and start to put some things in place. And all the time that we've been working with our Chapter Zero members, there's been this tension between, do you set an ambition? Do you really stretch the ambition? But then you're not entirely sure how you're going to get there. Or do you set what Graham talked about, which was a sort of much lower level that you know you can beat it? And, you know, and businesses traded those sorts of tensions all along. But I think from my experience, which as you can see from the grey hair is a bit long now, this is the most difficult one. It's the most difficult one because of the tragedy of the horizon, as people call it, the uncertainty. So it's quite hard if you're in a sector that isn't a direct generator. If you're a manufacturing company, if you're a food company or property company, a bank, I've been on the board of all four, it's quite hard to establish a baseline. It's quite hard to get your board to take the courage in both hands and set that ambition, which is why I think that one of the things that's come up quite a lot today, and certainly the TPT helps hugely, I think, the disclosure framework, is that you need to be prepared to set the ambition, drive the milestones, engage the organization, but then go back round the loop. And I mean, I know a board very well where that single board decision, what is the year that we will put in our plan for net zero, has gone from there to here, and now it's actually looking sort of Paris-aligned. So I think there's some interesting challenges. And I suppose the final point on that really is, you know, in the UK, for most of our companies listed in the UK, their emissions are 80% plus scope 3, you know, and so that in itself also brings quite a lot of challenge in terms of how you really get your head around. Huge opportunity, Sarah and others mentioned it, huge opportunity. But if you take that whole value chain from the person using your product right back to the material that came out of the ground, I mean, a lot of companies haven't really even baselined that yet. So, you know, we've got to get those first steps right. So I think we've got a mix of sectors in the room, and we thought it might be quite fun to get you involved in a small way in this. So what I want to do is ask you two questions. And I want people to be bold, all right? And it's quite difficult, I have to say, from here, because we've got quite a lot of light in our eyes, and the room's quite dark. Beautiful building as it is, but it's quite hard to see what's going on. So I want you to be bold, and when I ask you to put your hands up, put them right up, so that Rachel and I can get a sense of how many hands are going up, because somebody's dimmed the lights. Oh my goodness. Normally when they dim the lights, it means it's moving on to a different sort of music. Do you think we're going to? Yeah. So, question number 1. Hands up if your company or organization or an organization that you have advised has already set climate targets. Pretty good, isn't it? Pretty good. It's hard to see who didn't have their hands up. That's great. No, that's excellent. Okay, now, I was going to say keep your hands up if, but don't worry. Actually do. Put your hands back up, all right? Come on, bear with me on this. This is the closest to stand up I'm ever going to do, I think. Keep your hands up if the organization has published a transition plan which is aligned with 1.5 degrees. That's interesting. That's probably what, 20, would you say, in the room? So thank you. You may put your hand down now. I'm glad to see that the panel at the front are putting their hands up. That's very reassuring. So, well, that's really interesting and really not at all surprising, because we are starting this journey. For a lot of companies, we really are starting this journey. And I really passionately hope that if we did this time next year, which we probably won't, but if we were to do that, that we would get, a multitude more hands up. I suppose I could do one more. I'm not supposed to, but going off script, okay. Hands up if you're intending to publish a net zero transition plan within the next 12 months. A few more. We need more. We need more. Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. So, I really commend the TPT framework, having been involved in it, but I do think it's a great help in getting started on this journey. So let's get back to SSE, Rachel, if we may. And because you're quite advanced in all of this, so would you like to share some wisdom about how you make sure your climate targets are set with integrity, especially for those in the audience who haven't really got started yet?
Well, there's a couple of things, but first of all, to be fair to the other sectors, not every sector has got a clear, the science is understood on how you get to zero. So me and the team at SSE have got the scars on our backs from the fact that the methodology kept changing. So we had a set of targets and then it changed and we had to set another set of targets. So to be fair to everybody, it's not always, when your sector pathways come out, that will make life easier. But I suppose the other thing to say about our particular sort of circumstances that we're in is that SSE was a major emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So 10 years ago, when I started this job, we directly emitted 25 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That made us one of the largest emitters, certainly in the UK, but beyond too. Last year, we were down to 5 million tonnes, and our 1.5 degree aligned interim target for 2030 is to be down to 2.5 million tonnes en route to zero. But I suppose your question is about integrity. And because of all of that, almost particularly because of the contribution we've been made to climate change, we judged that we needed an independent badge, basically to demonstrate that the targets that we were setting were not greenwashy in any sense. And the Science-Based Target Initiative really is the only game in town that allowed us to do that. But also, for the sort of climate science purists in the room, you will also know that there is a particular pathway for the power sector set by the International Energy Agency. And what that basically says is that power sectors in the developed world should pretty much be at net zero by 2035, in the developing world by 2040. Now, in the centre of our net zero transition plan, we dealt with this because we did not think that we were yet in a position to set with confidence a net zero target for scopes 1 and 2 by 2035. And what we decided to do was to basically publish a spectrum of emissions. So we basically said it would be anything between 700,000 tonnes and 2.1 million tonnes. And by doing that, we're giving policymakers, because we don't live in a purist scientific bubble, we live in a country where we've got obligations to provide energy and to secure supplies of energy to businesses and households. So we thought if we are really clear and open and honest about where we think we'll get to, then that is a signal to the policymakers to adapt the policy, in particular how you bring an orderly phased reduction of unabated gas. That's a bit technical, but you get the point, is that we basically pursued, we made a deliberate decision to be really open and say, this bit's hard. We will have got 90% of our emissions down, but every gram is going to count and we're going to have to account for it. So that was how we dealt with that, I suppose. And the thing that I would say, that everyone was talking earlier about taking brave pills and just doing it. We took brave pills to do that. And what I found is that actually it was more believable. So with our stakeholders and our shareholders, because we were so honest, it's gone down better than some heroic target that we'd had no idea how we would achieve. Now, again, I'm interested in the broader thing because I don't know the rest of the economy so well. What advice would you give to those businesses starting on their journey for this credibility, to that sort of balance, and that means that you're doing it with integrity and credibility?
So I think that the first step is to get the baseline, and I mentioned earlier, quite a lot of companies still don't know the full end-to-end value chain baseline for their emissions. I think that it's really important to have the resources that you need to do this work. I mean, the early sandboxes we did, I remember one where there was someone who was in a very big company and they had 2 people working on transition planning. I mean, it was, you know, businesses are good at planning. They're good at strategy, they're good at planning. They've been doing it for donkey's years. But this thing sometimes gets seen as being something slightly different and using different people. I think you need to bring the absolute best thinking in all the parts of that business, operationally, financially, strategically, to bear on this and draw on the experts like you, but the experts like you cannot do it for the company. So it's really about it being integrated with the business strategy. Boards need to work with scenarios too. It's no good just picking one. We don't know how it's going to play out. So we're good at doing that. We work with scenarios and other things. And then I think just 2 other points. Accountability is absolutely crucial here. And the board ultimately has to be accountable. I wish some of the board members that I meet could have been in this room and heard that panel, because I think a lot of them feel quite nervous still about setting out an ambitious target and then being held to account for it and finding they can't quite make it. So I think that we need to educate and to support and encourage, because if the board's not on top of this, the decisions are going to be so big, the allocations of capital are going to be so significant. If the board's not on top of it will fall. It might start, but it will fall. So those are a few things, a few points I would give. And I think we just got time for one last sort of element, really, which is I was interested in, I know that something that you're really conscious of and leading in is the idea of the just transition. And I thought you might tell us a bit about how that plays out.
I'll be really quick, but it is important to take stock and remember that achieving net zero is not some technocratic carbon accounting exercise. This is about people, colleagues, communities, and customers as well. And net zero does represent the most almighty industrial and economic upheaval that perhaps most of us have seen. And also, if you think about the economic transformations of the past, are not exactly covered in glory in terms of their impact on people, working people in their communities. And as a company, but also, there's a good few of us around that have been trying to champion this notion that the transition to net zero is about people, and that what we need to do here is not just because of the social justice arguments, but because we need a thoughtful, people-centred transition that is more likely to earn legitimacy and consent. And of course, without legitimacy and consent, a company like us, isn't going to be able to do the investments, the almighty investments that are required offshore for transmission infrastructure and all the other things. So actually, we need to put the people right in the middle of all of this too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, sometimes people sort of use this term just transition and they're thinking more about what are we doing to support the global south. Just transition is about the whole thing, and it's going to affect jobs massively on the upside, but also, people are going to have to accept changes. And we know that when you try and execute changes in any sort of political context, people push back. I mean, we see it every day in the news in terms of, no wind farms on my patch. So we've really got to get the communication, I think, right on all of this and take the public with us, take the employers with us. And I think Graham made the point, it's a great opportunity to engage people. I've found in some of my businesses that people get really excited when you start to get them involved in all of this in all different sectors, including the advertising sector, which you mentioned earlier, which has been quite interesting. So we need to take people with us on this journey, and to do that, we need to get a really, I think, significantly better understanding about what it's going to mean, how it's going to affect people, why it's worth doing, and why, there may be some bumps in the road, but we have no choice. We've absolutely got to do this. Possibly one thing for people to take away, and then I'll hand over to Ben.
Stay close to your stakeholders. Be really, really close to them and listen to them and be honest.
Absolutely. And look at the TPT disclosure framework. I mean, honestly, I came into it thinking, I hope this is going to be good. It's brilliant. I mean, as a board member who's working in all these different sectors, I think it's going to be incredibly helpful, and I very much hope it will get adopted more broadly. So I think that probably brings us to a close. Rachel, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Lovely to see you again.